On that note, some of the things that we are going to address today are skills that are needed for product management, how to take on more responsibilities in your current role. I took on a lot of PM responsibilities being in a policy role actually, and then made a transition and internal transfer. So I hope that that transfer sort of resonates with some of you on the call today. Resources to take advantage of, day-to-day life of a PM, and then core competencies needed to thrive as a PM leader. So on that note, I want to just do a little bit introduction about myself in case you don't know. My name is Nupur, of course. I am currently a product manager at Google/YouTube video ads. I have been at Google for about 6 years, and I have worked in various functions and domains, largely been around in ads ecosystem. So definitely found my grounding there. But prior to this, I used to work for an insurance-based firm and then also a retail company, Gap in San Francisco, for their IT security team. I did my degree in mathematics, so I was generally very drawn towards it, but I wouldn't call myself that, I code 24/7. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted a blend of both my technical and interest in business skills to grow. And while product management was not something that was, I think it was very prestigious. It still is. 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. But I think what was even more prominent was that product management became a field to kind of hone in both of these skills. And I think it found a perfect fitting with a lot of folks who wanted to not be fully technical, but not be just with stakeholders all day long, but be able to grow their product and their vision. Something else about me, during this spring, I know when COVID was all-time high, my husband, who's also a fellow PM, we started this initiative called Help Your Peers. And we really wanted to help our peers during this time of crisis. So what we did was we created a platform of mentors and mentees who were either actively interviewing or wanting to get back and their employment was affected because of COVID. And as a result of this, with no hope and sort of no agenda, we kind of grew, I would say in about 48 hours or so after announcement, we had over 200 mentors and applications from all over the world. And we were able to prioritize over 1,000 candidates with mentors. So the idea was to give them sort of a guidance on resume reviews, interview preparation, and job exploration. And this was a tough time. The market was really bad, but I think sometimes even a comforting word goes a long way for these candidates. But I'm happy to say that a lot of our candidates are now coming back and mentioning that they have job offers now. So with the economy improving a little bit, we are definitely seeing our candidates also land really great jobs for themselves. We also fostered partnerships with amazing companies like Maternity, Slido, Airtable, Slack, Product School, and as such. And we did cater to our junior cohort as well for those who wanted to get into product management. The program is officially paused as of now, but given the interest, I'd love to hear from you if you think this is helpful, and hopefully we can bring it back someday in the future. So more about my work as a PM now. Like I mentioned, I used to work in policy when I entered Google. This was very new to me, but in hindsight, I think it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, because not only were you thinking about technology and how to grow a product, but you were also thinking about the ethics of the product as well and how you want to grow that product from a legal and a policy perspective. And I think with the emerging trends now, this has become a more important field than ever. But regardless of just being different functions, I actually saw a lot of similarities between policy and product during this time. The primary objective being that the focus was always on the end user. We were always trying to solve complex problems. We worked with a large cross-functional team, and we really couldn't move our needle if we don't know enough about our own product, right? So having the in-depth product knowledge was absolutely must key. But I knew that these kind of 4 criteria, or I would say skill set, was easily transferable to some other roles. And I had my heart on getting into product management, and I can share more about my journey a little later on. But I kind of wanted to give you an idea of how I thought about approaching product management when this wasn't really my focus in the beginning. When I entered Google, I thought it was a great idea to become a product manager, but I didn't know what it actually meant. And throughout my experience as a policy, I got exposed to a lot of product managers and their work, and I thought I could make that transition myself. So a lot of you may have seen a chart like this. I included because I think you can't fundamentally move away from this. Product management is somewhere between business and tech. Like I said, technical skills and business skills, but it has to be customer focused. And between all of that sits product management. Now, the role and the definition has evolved in industry from domain and function to function, right? Like what happens at Google may not happen at a startup, for instance, and that's okay. Different PMs bring in a different flavor of their product skill set. And I think the job requires a very different skill set these days, right? Which is very visible in the job titles as well. So you get like growth PMs, you get product marketing, for instance. But the end goal is very similar, right? You need to own the vision of your product and you still need to have a customer focus at the end of the day. Without all of this, everything becomes somewhat of a meaningless objective. But I think the one thing to highlight here is because you are managing expectations of many teams, the one thing you can't avoid is being able to influence without authority. You don't have a team to run per se, but you have a team to carry on to a similar objective and get them on the same page as you are, which means that sometimes it means negotiating with teams on what seems to be the right idea or accepting their pushback, right? Like maybe this isn't the right time, maybe they have a valid idea. So listening is a very important thing during this time as well. But I think in product management generally, empathy goes a very long way. But I think the ability to listen to others, to understand what is really needed of our users is absolute key. So you may have seen product managers talk about this quite a bit. The idea is that I found this fun illustration here, but basically product managers say more no than yes. And the reason is because it's easy to say yes, but it's hard to deliver all the yeses. But I think more objectively, because our job is to focus on a singular vision for a user, it's easy to get distracted with the yeses. So when we get approached by tons of requirements and features and sales requests and legal and all of that, you have to prioritize in a way that makes sense for the user, for your product. And of course, you prioritize given the nature of the work as well. But more often or not, I think the skills that I've seen in my mentors and even more seasoned product managers are they're very tactfully saying no to a lot of things so that they can do the right thing for the users. But it's, I would say it's a transferable skill to any job title, I would say. All right, I will take a quick pause. If anyone have any questions per se, please use the Q&A feature. But like I said, I wanted this to be a very sort of informal session where I want to answer all your questions. So at any given point you want to interrupt and ask anything, I'm more than happy to do so. Given that, let's go over some of the main important things that you need to kind of do in order to do that transition over to PM. One, you need to differentiate yourself and embrace your skills. I know people have said this before. I know you must have heard this over and over again, but it's really important. And it's actually even more important now during this pandemic when, unfortunately, there have been so many layoffs that it has increased the competition quite drastically. I have seen very, very excellent candidates out in the market trying to find their jobs. And it's just a very unfortunate situation. But the more you can distinguish yourself, the more you can catch somebody's eye on your resume, right? Which means that it doesn't mean that you have to pick a unique subject or domain. It means that sometimes you do a little bit more than what others expect of you in your job to kind of set yourself apart. For instance, when I was doing policy work, Google has a system called 20%, where you can ask like other teams where you can work 20% of your time with them. So the way I differentiated myself there was I asked a product manager for a similar team where I was working, and I said, why don't you give me some requirements from your backlog, which I know you probably won't be able to get to it this quarter, and I will deliver it for you. Here's the best thing. I already know about the product. I have the domain knowledge, and you know me. So there is no risk taking per se. You might as well as get your work done, and I will also hone in on my skills. It was kind of a win-win scenario, but it was maintaining two jobs at one point, but I think it went a long way in trying to differentiate myself on my resume. So convert your disadvantage into an advantage. I think a lot of people get worried about, I don't fit the mold of a product manager, which is really disheartening to hear sometimes. And I think instead of focusing on what the market wants, be yourself, right? Let the market decide what they want out from you instead of you trying to mold into what you think is the perception of a product manager. So for instance, if you are a biology major or a history major wanting to get into product, own it actually. You may even stand out because if anything, I'd be very curious to see why someone with that kind of background is trying to make into a product, and maybe they bring in a very unique skill set with them in that. So don't fixate on what the market wants and what you think is the right thing to do. Do some A/B testing of your resume as well, right? Like send out tons of resumes and see different versions of it and see which one is getting you more success in terms of callback, for instance. Another thing is, I've heard this a lot of from candidates is they want to be technical because they think all product managers are technical. That is incorrect. Now, there are some industries and companies that require the product manager to be technical, and that's primarily driven because how the company is operating or the product itself, right? For instance, Google is an engineering-driven company, and so they prefer their product managers that are actually technical to some degree. Now, they don't expect us to code, but they expect us to know pretty decent amount of knowledge on the technical side so that we can have a easy conversation with our engineers, right? So it means that, yes, I may not know how to code, but I can read a code and I can create dashboards and I can create scripts when time to time need. But the idea of that, I need to know and I need to be proficient in coding and I need to go back to school to take CS courses, that's incorrect. That's not true. I think a lot of people can pick up these technical skills along their way in their job, right? Like learn SQL. There are tons of free classes available. Learn about APIs. Generally, if you want to be in a tech field, this is a good area to kind of dive yourself into emerging tech, but also understand what is the fundamental of technology per se, right? If you are obviously going for a role that is requiring you to be more technical, ask the recruiter upfront what is expected of that product manager. The last thing you want to do is get in a seat and then realize you don't have the skill set. So like I said, tons of free resources, but I don't want people to feel overwhelmed that they need to be technical in order to excel in their career as a product manager. All right. So have a zeal for learning, gain knowledge on both technical and business. Now, this is really interesting. Domain expertise, there is no substitution for that. You cannot make good decisions about your product if you don't know your product end to end. Now, this is really difficult, especially if you're joining in as a new PM on a product that has already existed. This has happened to me. Ads is a very seasoned product at Google. I obviously don't know everything about it, but I need to know enough about my own product to make very meaningful decisions about its vision and its future. One of the really cool things that we do at Google is we take the first couple of months as sort of a product knowledge area, and we have a list of people we have to meet in order to kind of get their understanding of the product as well. So whenever a PM joins, we get a long list of people saying these are the meetings to join and these are the people you want to meet, and these are their roles and titles. And for the next, I would say about 2 to 3 months, you actually do that. You fly down to meet your engineering teams if they're not next door to you. You do catch-up sessions with people. You meet your directors. You meet your VP. You basically try to get an understanding of your product end to end, and some history and background of what is actually needed at this. I thought it's a really great system. I think a lot of big companies do that. But if you're working for a startup or you want to get into it, you can make this plan for yourself, right? There are tons of plans for this 30, 60, and 90 days. Use that time because that is the time where people will give you a lot of allowance to learn about the role and your product. And you can ask tons of questions. But I mean, it's really hard if you're 2 years into your role and then you're asking basic questions, right? So use this time wisely. I think a lot of people get worried that it shows poor performance if I'm asking too many questions. On the other hand, actually, it shows a sign of great strength if you're asking all the right questions and if you are challenging the norm in per se, right? They hired you for a reason, show them the reason eventually. Now you build a strong network in and outside your company, find mentors. Help your peers get started to find mentors as well, right? You can only go a long way being in your own bubble, thinking what you think is the right way for your career. Everyone has gone through their share of ups and downs. It's good to find someone who can relate to your pain or can give you very meaningful advice in your career, right? I've rarely met anyone who said that they have excelled in their career all by themselves. If you can't find a mentor outside, try within your company, even try your peer, right? It doesn't have to be a formal mentoring program, but you need to have some meaningful sort of connection or a close cohort of people who you can bank on every time you have a question about your career, about your, if something happened at work, something that you want to do, something you want to pursue, if product is the right thing to do, right? If the company culture is something to your expectations, all of that. I have a couple of mentors that, I'm very respectful of their time, but it's always good to know that I can always go to them for any questions that I have. And I know the one thing I can rely on them is for very objective answers and even if it means that I'm wrong, that's fine. But I need someone who's very objective and very clear in saying that, yes, you may be wrong, or yes, you may be overreacting, or you're right, this isn't the right role for you, move to something else, move to product management. I think it would be a good one. Some sort of an encouragement as well. So highly recommend doing that, product or not. Find mentors, find supporters, find sponsors for yourself. So work on side projects, build portfolio, bridge knowledge gaps, right? Now, the one question I usually get is, how do you become a product manager when you don't have product experience? And it seems like a vicious circle, right? Majority of the job requirements mention that you need to have product experience to become a product manager, which seems kind of like a dilemma. It's like, how do you do that without getting a job? The good thing is you can actually work on side projects. That doesn't take a lot of time, but it does require a lot of dedication if you're going to treat it like a product, right? The one thing I did with my 20% is actually create side projects. How will someone know if I'm a good product manager until I have something to show them? And as a result, so that's why I did something within Google to first show that I'm capable of working as a product manager. Now I just have to interview and actually give it a shot as a full-time product manager. But if you don't have that opportunity within your company, I say go outside of it, right? It's so easy to pick a favorite app or a favorite product and build a new feature around it. Do some experimentation. Go and ask users what they would like to change and what you would like to propose. Draw a wireframe. You don't actually need a working product in order to convince someone that you're doing a good job. You just need to know enough that you're thinking like a product manager. You're obviously obsessed about the feature that you're building and you're finding a very meaningful decision out of it on how to further grow that. Challenge yourself out of it. Now, I also realize working on side projects is not easy. I will give you an example of what I did towards the end of the presentation. But I'd say the one thing that worked and I highly recommend everyone to do is attend a hackathon or a startup weekend. They are very low risk opportunities for you to create something very meaningful and very big, right? Even if you're scared of hackathons and if you don't have technical skill set, it's okay. You're going to form a team there. You're going to learn from them. But I think what's important to recognize is people can learn from you as well, right? You bring in your own talent and skill set to the game. So it's okay not to be technical. And I didn't want you to be afraid of the word hackathon, but I think I've attended a few. That's how I got into the zone that I want to be a product manager. And I absolutely loved it. Pick a topic. There are tons of virtual hackathons right now. And I think at most it takes a weekend, which I'm sure a lot of you can spare to build a product. And if you like it and you like your team, you can continue something on there as well. But if you don't like it, you still have a product to show on your resume, add that and showcase it, what you've done. Number 6, practice your interviewing skills. There is no substitution in this game for your interviewing game. You need to be top-notch here. Product management interviews are a beast of their own. They are a science of their own and to some degree. Product design, product execution, we can go in details about that as well. But practice, if you want to be a true product manager and you want, say, the large tech companies, there is a way to understand the problems and deliver your solutions, right? Learn how to do that. Get to the point where this is becoming second nature to you. I know someone who did 100 to 200 product design questions and eventually like kind of came to the point where they were just excelling every interview they were coming along, right? And you don't need anyone to do that. You just need maybe find a partner, find your spouse, find a friend, and even your mom, right? Like just say that if you were to improve a feature on your refrigerator or your microwave, how would you do that? And it doesn't have to be big innovative things. It could be very simple day-to-day activities, right? If you're in shower, how would you improve your shower experience? What would you change about that? Think of 3 features, how would you deliver it? So use your day-to-day skill set, but I think that worked really well for me because I was constantly in the zone of how to think like a product manager. So when it came really time for interviewing and studying for it, it didn't feel like I had to go out of my way to actually understand all of this skill set. I was doing this anyway. Number 7, I believe this is the last one on the series. It's focus on personal growth and invest in yourself. This is the reason I added this is because I'm seeing a lot of people who, again, want to fit in the mold. So they think that doing the certain number of courses, certain number of certifications will get them to become just like everyone else. Well, don't become everyone else, and don't get certifications because that's what everyone thinks you should have. What do you like, right? You have to ask yourself, do you really enjoy product management? Because it's okay if you don't and you want to be still around product management, right? There are different functionalities and roles available today that work with product managers without actually being a product manager. That's okay, as long as you get to do the work, to get the title, right? The title will come by itself. So focus on personal growth. What is it that you want to do? What is it that you think you will achieve out of the course? I think that's way more important than saying that I think I'm going to have this line on my resume or on my LinkedIn profile that I think the recruiters will be really impressed. The reality is, if you think this is that easy, everyone else is probably doing the same thing. I'll say this again, stop trying to find a perfect formula to become a product manager. There isn't one, right? Everyone has a different journey. Everyone that you kind of admire or look up to, or may have even seen them on their LinkedIn, you desire to have their career, they went through their own struggles and journey. You're just not exposed to that. But there isn't any perfect formula. It's not that you do one certification and suddenly you become a product manager, right? It comes with the idea that you want to improve products for your customers. If you can't find it in a formal work environment, do it outside of work. There is no shame. There are open source websites where you can pick on projects, right? You can create something by yourself. You can create a 10-page slide on how you want to improve Netflix or Spotify or Airbnb, or pick any company, or pick a no-name app, for instance, and see if I want to build a new app to solve a problem X. One way I get inspired is looking at Product Hunt. I think it's a brilliant website. It showcases tons of really great products and startups. I get a lot of my inspiration from there to see what the industry is kind of working on, what kind of new emerging tech is coming out of it, and essentially what are people actually working on, right? Like what makes sense, what gets me excited, where do I want to click and learn more? And it just becomes another source of inspiration. So highly recommend going on that website. It's producthunt.com. Really quickly, I wanted to go about resumes and interviews because I went through this myself. I want to relate everything that I have learned along my journey of to-do and don'ts on resume and interviews, right? The do thing is keep it to one page. I know I have seen a couple of pages being circulated around. The reality is when you get volumes of resumes, you just don't have a lot of time. It's really unfortunate, and it shouldn't be this way, but it is, which means that every resume will not get more than a minute. And people typically focus a lot more on the first half of the page than the second half, which is why you keep your most objective and relevant base data right at the top. You don't use that space to create more vagueness, right? So avoid using like objective and mission statement unless it's absolutely necessary. For instance, if you're applying for a product manager role and your objective is to find a product management role, it's a waste of space. I get it. You wanted to do it. I'm not questioning your ability. I just want to see how you're projecting to become like a product manager. Another thing is don't do keyword stuffing. This is a big no-no. I've seen a lot of people looking at job descriptions and then kind of figuring out a way of just doing stuffing, keyword stuffing on their resumes because they think the ATS system will pick it up. It may pick it up, but there's a human at the end of this cycle who's going to look at your resume and will probably be very discouraging to see someone who's just stuffing keywords without actually having a meaningful story behind their work experience. So don't do that. But one way of actually tackling that problem is use that in your bullet points of how you're describing a job. For instance, if you are finding keywords like cross-functional leadership, road mapping, then say something like that in your current role, right? Work with a large XFN team of 8 people, of engineers and designers to do XYZ things, right? So figure out a way to combine it in your work experience rather than just listing it. It's a very negative experience for the interviewer as well and someone who's looking at your resume. And brag smartly, right? This is your resume. This is your time to shine. Don't go overboard with the numbers that you feel is slightly unrealistic, but don't be worried if you don't have the numbers. It's okay to not read through a project end to end, especially for your interns, right? So do a projected numbers, right? Like when I did something, the projected operational value was X% on FTE time. That's okay. An approximate value is better than nothing, but it gives you an indication how big the project was as an interviewer. Adding projects on your resume. I spoke about my side projects. The one thing is, because I'm such a big advocate of that, I created a separate section on my resume that says, you know, achievements or leadership activities, so that it gets immediately drawn to that. So because I didn't have a formal PM experience when I joined Google as an ads PM role, I did a lot of work as a side PM. And so I included that both in my work experience and as a leadership or other achievements, like my hackathons came under other achievements here. You can also do pro bono work. If you've done that, then this is a great time to include all of that. Like, just imagine that you want someone to look at the resume and say, like, sure, this person may not be a PM by title, but they can do a damn amazing job in becoming a product manager. And I have no doubt that if I hire this person, they can pick up the skill in no time. That's the message you want to deliver to your interviewer, not that you're an existing product manager. The reality is, if your resume is not showing it, you can't convince that to someone. But what you can convince people is you're smart enough to pick up any skill set thrown at you. Really quick here, on the interview side, product management has typically sort of 6, I would say like largely 6 different areas to cover. I know it's a lot, but it is what it is. These are obviously, they vary quite a bit on startups versus bigger companies, FANGs, typically, but I've been through enough FANG interviews to give you an idea if you're ever looking at a larger companies. Smaller companies will be more case study specific, but I think the underlying logic is very similar to this. So for instance, on your general interview, be confident, right? Your world is now limited to the screen. You can't meet people, you can't project how you're feeling. Everything is limited to a screen, unfortunately, during this time. So take advantage of that. Be confident, be, show that you're excited to be there, show that, you have enthusiasm. There's no point of being very dull and monotonous at this point, because everyone is judging you on how you, or how you're being perceived on the screen, as opposed to what you are in person, right? It could be 2 different things. So if you don't feel like you're in that zone of like projecting that you're like super excited to be there, then figure out a way to do that, right? I'm not asking you to change your personality. I'm just saying that find a way to show enthusiasm that you want to be there, so that the interviewer also wants to be there to interview you. One important thing I would say here is avoid red flags, which is negative connotations. I'll take a pause here. The idea here is you don't ever want to say that I don't know to do something else. So if somebody asks you, how did you do XYZ? You shouldn't start your response saying, well, I've never worked with designers, for instance. You don't want to say that. You can always say that, hey, while I've had great experience working with so many stakeholders with various functionalities, I may not have formal experience working with designers, but given the opportunity, I think I can excel in this role. You always want to make that sound positive, because the reality is people remember the negative things a lot more than the positive things. So it's important that you project yourself more positive, because if you say, I don't know how to do something, chances are that's the only thing they'll remember about you at the interview, and they'll bring that up later on. Last but not least, on this side, tell a story, not facts. Your resume is showing all the facts. I don't need a rundown of your employment history. I need to know that whether you're interesting enough for this job, whether you're a good person and a good product manager who will be suitable for the team and for the product and its growth, right? So show your personality here, project a story. You don't actually have to list every single employment, but you can narrate a story saying, I started my career in IT security and moved over to strategy and then found my way to policy and I learned XYZ. Because of my interest, I found my way into product management where I'm utilizing all of these skill sets. Figure out a way to narrate the story as opposed to, I worked at Gap, I worked at somewhere else, I worked at YouTube, I worked at Google. It sounds very disconnected, but it sounds like you're just doing a rundown of your resume as well. I'll take a little bit of pause. I spoke a lot. Any questions? Like I said, feel free to use the Q&A feature, but I'll do a little bit of pause for you guys to like read the screen as well. All right, I see one question being asked. We'll take that towards the end. Okay, I'll continue until I get interrupted. Behavioral interviews, please take this seriously. A lot of people actually avoid behavioral interviews or studying for it because they think they can just do it. I mean, after all, it is your experience, you know how to best convey. But more, what's really interesting to see is actually most people fail on this segment of the interview. The reality is because they're not prepared, because they think they can come up with stories during that time. But given the pressure and trying to put your best foot forward in front of the interviewer, your stories are sometimes not coherent, or sometimes candidates not even like answering the question that is being asked of them. So one thing to prepare here is if you're studying 80% of your time on technical or product design interviews or execution, save 20% on behavioral interviews, even 10 or 90%, but don't ignore that fact, right? Have examples ready. For instance, if someone's saying, tell me about a time when you failed as a leader, tell me about a time when your project didn't work according to your plan, tell me about a time when you had a stakeholder disagreement. You should be able to come up with really quick stories and really great stories about what was the problem, give some context, how did you solve for it, and what did you learn at the end of it. Don't forget the what did you learn, because you want to make them same mistakes over and over again. So use that STAR system. It's very fundamental, and it is very basic, but it actually works, right? Because it's a very coherent story. Here's the situation, here's the problem, here's how I resolved it, here's something I learned out of it, and hopefully I won't do it again. So now comes the more product sort of related, this is a segment where more product interviews come into light. So product strategy is really interesting. I always used to get asked these questions, which is, how do you do your product prioritization? How do you create your roadmap? And how do you even price your product if your product is monetizing? Fundamentally, like the prioritization and roadmap, you should know this, right? If you're working on a product interview skills. Now, it's okay if you didn't work on a product that required all of this, but essentially a product roadmap is, how did you think what's the next feature to build in, even in your side project? Why did you choose what you chose today to build? And that's essentially creating a roadmap, right? You don't need a formal approval from a company to say that you've created a roadmap. You need a vision to say, this is how I prioritize this using these features. I use monetization, I use technical skill set, I use technical debt, I used value to customers, bunch of different criteria, rated them from 1 to 5 and see which one scored the most. That's how I prioritize. Maybe that's a way that you do your product prioritization. Completely okay if it works with your company and your culture as well. But know these questions and practice them. Try it on your side projects, it's completely fine. Then comes the really meaty part of the product management interviews, which is the product design, product sense, and technical. So product design, use frameworks to answer your questions. It's always good to have a structure to your solution because people can follow your answers. But by no means stick to a structure where it becomes to the point where if I throw you a wrench in this answer, you get confused and you get lost as like, where exactly, what was I talking about? You don't want to ever be in a position in an interview where you're not confident about your own answers, right? So use frameworks. Circles framework is very popular by Lewis Lane, but by no means make that the only framework that you want to use. Hone it to your own style and see what you want to do with it, right? But essentially, repeat the question and ask what is being asked of you. So if somebody says, how would you monetize a Google product? You will then start asking question, why am I building this product? It's fundamentally important to ask, because if I ask you, even outside the interview settings, if I ask you to do something, your first response is, why am I doing this? Why is this so important for me to do it, right? You have to use the same logic when you're in front of an interviewer. Prepare yourself, take some time to think. It's okay to take 10, 20, even 30-second pauses and ask them like, hey, I need a minute to kind of write down my thoughts here and work with it. I have taken maybe up to a minute and a half sometimes when trying to create a solution. But once I have that little me time to think about my solution, I'm able to go through and answer pretty quickly in, let's say, about 15 minutes for a case study. Product sense is really interesting. It's all about root cause analysis. Facebook in particular is very interested in your product sense. And it's like, or product execution is like, what is your, how do you tackle your problems, right? What is it that's causing the problems, and how do you find that problem in order to solve it? And I think that's sometimes even the more important part. They're not looking for the perfect solution. They're actually looking, how well can you think given a crisis or given a very important problem? Do you panic? Do you go in 8 different directions? Or do you say, okay, it is a problem. Let's figure it out. What could have caused this problem? For instance, a perfect example of this question is, if you're working on a product X, you walk in one day into your office and you say one of your key KPIs have dropped by 10%. How would you resolve this? How would you investigate what's going on? And you need to have a very methodological answer saying that I do this because, okay, let's find out trends around this. Has it always happened around this time? Is this one-off? Have you ever seen dips this big, 10%? Maybe we have seen 20% dips, and that's fine, given the scenario. Who would I talk to? How would I tackle this problem? All of that scenarios, you have to start thinking like, if you're given a problem, how well do you objectify that problem into meaningful statements and actually solve it? You don't have to boil the ocean. You just need to figure out what is the exact root cause of the problem. And then the last is the technical, which is breakdown of technical competence. Now, not every PM role will ask you on the technical skill set, but I think it's really important to know that, especially if you are interviewing at Google, Google loves their PMs to be technical, which means they want to know how you work with engineers. They want to know that if you have fundamental understanding of some concepts that are just generally used in day-to-day life, which means, do you know about APIs? Do you know about cloud computing? You don't have to go into details about all of this, but do you even know what cloud computing is? Do you know how cloud storage works, for instance? Do you know fundamentals of security? What needs to happen? All of that, get into the zone if you want to be more into the technical aspect. It's very, very important that even though your role doesn't require for it, if you want to work for a tech industry, get into the habit of actually wanting to learn more and learn more about the trends that are emerging, because then you have more meaningful, creative solutions to your product as well. There are tons of resources online to do this. I personally used YouTube actually to study my technical concepts. I'm a more visual person. I started reading a lot of books, finally gave up, ended up looking a couple of YouTube videos, understood the fundamentals, then went back to the books, and then kind of honed in on my skill set, on my technical skill set from there. All right, I have super last one thing to show you on my side project, and then we'll take more questions. So one thing about creating side projects, I did go over this really quickly before, but there are 2 ways of creating side projects, right? One is internal and the other one's external. I did the both internal and external routes, so I'm happy to answer questions for both. Internal, if you don't work with the product manager, or if you do work with the product managers, but you're not getting product opportunities, here's a good time to start building your network. Go approach a product manager, tell them you're keen on being in product, and tell them that, because if you're working in the same domain, say that, hey, I noticed that this product's not really doing well, and we've found a couple of bugs here, and I think a quick fix could go a long way. I know that this is not being prioritized for this quarter, but I'd love to jump in and give in 20% of my time doing this. Would you be okay, willing to like guide or mentor me now or future for this project? See what the result looks like, right? The worst case scenario is they'll say no. You're no better off or worse off than where you started. It's okay. It's okay to hear that, but someone will say, someone was actually enthusiastic enough to approach me and ask me for a project. That goes a long way. People actually remember that. Find a product improvement opportunity and pitch it to a PM, right? If you don't know what their backlog actually looks like, find out about it. And if you don't, then learn more about the product, right? Again, you can only be creative about your product once you know the product. So learn the product that you want to participate into and see if you can come up with meaningful trends or solutions to problems that exist. There are plenty of work to be done on a single product. No PM is ever free. They have tons of things to do. Find things that would be valuable to you and to the PM as well at the end of the day. External, this is dependent on different personalities. Some people join courses, some people write blogs. Find an avenue to be creative, right? Participate in hackathons and startup weekends. I personally love this. I went through this my own way, where I did a couple of hackathons, built a couple of side projects, even extended one with my team and ran it for another 3 or 4 months. Learned a lot out of it. Got some amazing pitch decks that I was able to bring it to my interview and show them as a product portfolio. So this, take it to your advantage. If you don't like it, or you don't like the product, and you thought, it was okay, it still makes up for a very good story of why it wasn't interesting in an interview. All right, and then let me quickly show you my side project. I did something on Yelp. For people who are not familiar with Yelp, Yelp is sort of a directory of businesses and restaurants, sort of like a listings where people put in their reviews. And I think a large portion of their inventory is on restaurants. People use it for finding restaurants close by, reviews for it, food items, and as such. And then the other segment is finding local businesses to do an activity such as, car cleaning, oil change, and things like that. Figure out a problem, was a big user, loved the product. I said this concept of off-peak businesses exists everywhere, so it should exist in restaurant business. So what is off-peak business? For instance, if you travel to Hawaii during a rainy season, you're probably not going to pay the same cost as you are in December when the weather is really great. So they offset the cost because they invite you to the time where they think having a little money is better than having no money from you, right? And I think it caters to different needs, because someone say, well, I don't mind going to Hawaii during rainy season because I just wanted to travel. If it's 60% cheaper than it is in December, it's actually okay for me. And that's fine. Airlines do this all the time. Retailers do this. Power industry does it. For instance, if you use your electricity or water at night when there's low usage, your actually water bill comes out much cheaper. I'm not sure if it's the same everywhere, but it is a concept that is introduced by power industries as well. So I said it should be the same for restaurants. When it comes to reservations, time is money. And the idea was to help restaurants get reservations during less busy times. Super quick, went over the competition, looked at the reservations for everyone, what the stats look like, did some mock-ups, what it would look like, ignore the actual numbers here, but the idea was that invite people and do sponsored advertising. If you pick a time where the restaurant wasn't typically making a lot of money, then offer them a discount and integrate the payment solution in their system as well. So nobody has to take out like a Groupon voucher or anything when they're at the restaurant. If you book it through Yelp and their own reservation system, they will automatically get the discount on their final bill, and they will be the restaurant owner would be alerted of this as well. What would be the future? Sponsored advertising. You can have restaurants do a little bit of advertising to get more traffic to their restaurants as well during off-peak hours. Obviously not going into a lot of details here, but just to give you a gist of an idea of how I was thinking this problem for my interviews. It didn't have to be Yelp, you can pick any other product, but it is a way of building your product portfolio. Did some interviews with people, actually went and spoke with restaurant owners as well as people who eat out, and try to figure out what is their requirement. It was a very long deck, but I kind of cut it down for you guys here. Great. I want to open myself for questions. Hopefully that gave you a very good idea of what to expect and what my journey was, and a gist of like product management in general at big companies. But I open the floor to you guys.
Hey, Nupur, do you see the Q&A button on there?
I do.
Okay, so
But
you got 4 questions there. Just want to point those out to you. You can tick through those.
I'm not able to actually open up the Q&A for some reason.
Okay. Do you want me to I can rattle them off?
Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. The first one is what is an example of tactfully saying no?
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question. It's not that you should always say no because it's the easiest thing to do. No comes with a lot of credibility because you have something to back it up with. So, for instance, if people are giving you multiple requirements and you only have bandwidth of this much in your product, and you can only do so much in a quarter, you have to say, why is this important? Why am I saying no to this requirement and taking on the other? Which means you do your due diligence, right? Hey, I'm noticing that you're bringing in this topic. It's a great requirement, and I know our customers want it, but I have another bigger priority on my bucket, and it has a more meaningful impact to both revenues and to our users. Can I punt this to another quarter unless you give me more reasons of why I need to prioritize this right now? So it's also not just saying no, but also giving a reason and open the dialogue if you think it's the right way to go, right? Ask them why it should be important. So never say no for the sake of saying no, but always back it up with reasons.
Awesome. Your next one is how closely should your LinkedIn profile match your resume?
I would say this, I think a lot of recruiters are now relying on LinkedIn profiles. It doesn't have to replicate your resume, it's fine. But having some sort of a consistency between the two really helps, right? You don't want to be so blank on your LinkedIn profile that everyone's like, oh, if I never got their resume, I didn't know how much of a great candidate they are. So always use your LinkedIn profile as a leg up to your resume. Showcase your work, showcase your product portfolios, because the worst case scenario, someone's really interested and clicks on a link, they'll be taken to your website or a product portfolio. If anything, they'll only be impressed. So have a consistent, at the very least, have the same like job titles and description. But I would say like all the things that you don't think your resume has a space to fit in, put that on your LinkedIn. Your certifications, your side projects, what did you do? Go into the details. I don't think anyone has ever suffered for writing too much on LinkedIn. Hope
Perfect.
that was great.
That's great. Just ticking through the other ones. What are the best resources online to prepare for PM interviews, such as preparing for product questions or case studies?
Absolutely. Figure out a way that works the best for you. Like I said, I loved watching videos on YouTube, but focus is a big thing, right? It's easy to get distracted after a while. There are a couple of books that are really like well known. Cracking the PM, Decode and Conquer. I know these are long existing books as well, but there are tons of new courses available outside Product School, Explain on PM, Rocket Blocks, and productmanagementexercises.com. If you go on helpyourpeers.com, we actually have a resource guide as well that will give you an indication of where you are in your interview process and a couple of links associated with that. So feel free to take advantage of that resource that's already built out.
Awesome. What tools, apps do you recommend to create roadmaps?
Great. There are actually tons of tools available. I'll be honest, the best ones are the most simple ones. I have created roadmaps on PowerPoints and Google Slides and have been able to present that to executive leadership in a great way. So unless your company has adopted a particular tool, you don't actually have to go out of your way to find the best tool in the industry. When I think it's a perception, what may work for you may not work for me, for instance. So the idea is figure out the structure, what you want to draw. But go on Product Hunt. There are actually tons of startups that are coming out with different tools for product management. You may be something that you find interesting. Can't think of any, but I know Google have their own internal tools. But largely, we've actually used slides to create a roadmap and then backed it up with like strategy papers, for instance.
Great. We'll go a few minutes longer as long as people can stay on. Where do aspiring product managers overestimate themselves?
I think there are a couple of pitfalls here for aspiring product managers, right? I think people have taken down the definition of product management to their heart as opposed to trying to understand what it means for the companies, right? For instance, I get a lot of people asking me, they want to be a product manager at Google, but very few of them actually know what the interview process would look like, right? figure and immerse yourself in this process of what product management means to different companies, because the process is different. The expectation is different. There is no one path to do this, but also this trap of like, if they did it this way, then I probably will get my job the same way, right? For instance, if someone has done a product school, then I must also sign up for the certification course to do that. Now, it's always beneficial, never say no to education, but it doesn't guarantee you anything. Focus on your own personal learning, focus on your own interest. If you have a certain domain you want to focus on, then stick to that. You don't need to follow somebody else's route to get into product.
Great. What if your side project has its roots more in project management than product? Will that still showcase your skills and efforts to get into product?
Yeah, absolutely. The very idea that you wanted to do something outside of your norm, right? Like your normal day-to-day life, I think that itself gives you a big leg up over a lot of candidates here. Now, there is a difference. It's one thing to just say that you created a side project, and it's another thing to actually create a product, right? And if you're truly creating a product, then one way or the other, you're probably not recognizing that they're actually doing more product management skills than project management. And the lines get blurry, and it's okay. But it's the way you project it, right? If you have come up with the idea and you're doing a lot of execution, there is a way to showcase your product management skills, even in a project management domain, which means talking to executive stakeholders, talking to leadership, helping draw the roadmap, helping come up with a prioritization plan. All of these are product management duties, so they're not restricted to one over the other.
Awesome. And our last one here is, can you talk about some ways you go about learning about the customer, especially if the company provides product services in an industry that is new to you?
That's a very good question. So if I understand this correctly, you're saying that the product is new, you don't have a lot of underlying data to back this up, right? That comes in two parts. One, it is one of those things when you get into a new domain or a topic, or creating new products from scratch that you don't have a lot of competition for. The best way to do this is first you surround yourself with really smart and talented people who have done this over and over again, so they can give you the right direction. But you as a PM, you have to balance both the ambiguity and trying to find the data both at the same time. The reality is you're never going to get the data that you want, but you can get close enough to it. But you have to make very meaningful deductions out of it, right? So it's not like you'll never have any data. If you don't, then start figuring out a way to capture data, right? Which means you talk to the customers, even if they're two customers, go talk to them. Try to understand what is their motive behind joining your product or using your product. So set up that sort of a path for collecting data. But because you have to make a decision based on very limited data, recognize that and bring it up to leadership as well, right? In companies, saying that you don't actually have a lot of data, which means that you're not able to make very meaningful insights now. You would rather wait for another month to increase the growth model here, get more data, and come back to this. If you're not in the luxury of doing that, then you say that given the limited amount of data, this is how I extrapolate. There is an error percentage introduced in my data, and it's okay to say that out. In fact, I think you should say that out loud, and say that because of this deduction, I anticipate doing this, but here are the risks and mitigation strategies if the numbers are way off than what we projected. That's the key here, right? It's that you know that you may fail based on your numbers. Is that what happens next if you do actually fail, right? If they are not what you projected, how do you come back and fix the problem? And I think when you inspire people to think about the risk and mitigation strategies, you've kind of won them over.
Hey, awesome. We had one more question sneak in. I'm going to pose it to you anyway.
No.
Should I post my side projects on LinkedIn or save those for the interview process?
I say go on LinkedIn and do it. The problem is if you save everything for your interviews, you want to grab somebody's attention right at the beginning of the process, right? If you think you have enough on your resume to get through enough interviews, then sure, bring this up in your interviews. But the reality is you need that hook on your side projects to get people's attention. Put that on your LinkedIn, create a website, put that on a blog. I know a lot of Medium articles are popular these days. Do whatever you can to project that you know about what you're talking and you have credibility in the market, right? But save stories for your interviews. What you don't do on your interviews is, or LinkedIn profiles is like write lengthy stories. You describe the product, what you built, what your role was, but see the stories, the best stories for your interviews. Why was it challenging? Why did you want to build it out? Why wasn't this easy? What happened during phase X? Did you experience a failure at any given point? Those are the stories you save for the interviews, not the very fact that you did a side project.
Awesome. That's all we got. Any other
Great.
parting words? I know we're a little bit over time. Thank you for sticking around longer. And again, apologies for the technical glitch there.
No problem. I hope everyone found this helpful. Like I said, there is no one single path for product management, but you also don't chase the title, right? Chase the work. Do what excites you. Do meaningful work that you feel very good about walking away at the end of the day and say, like, this is the kind of users I want to face. This is the kind of features I want to build. This is the kind of company culture I want to be associated with. So don't chase the titles, chase the work. And I'm sure all of you inherently will become product managers one way or the other. But good luck to you all. And I'm happy to connect offline with anyone who have any more questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really informative session. Yeah, connect on LinkedIn. It sounds like a good way to reach you. And thanks to all the attendees. I think there are another 1 or 2 sessions on kind of growing in product management overall. If you're curious, maybe some other ways to fill in some details as well. So check those out. And again, thank you to Nupur. Thank you to all the attendees and great questions.
Okay. Thanks everyone. Thanks Ryan. Thanks team.
All right.